Hey guys, Chase back with a brand new series. Today I'm going to be responding to a video posted by Capturing Christianity. It is him along with Dr. William Lane Criag rebutting the best atheist arguments. And I put that in quotes because they put that in quotes. And at the beginning of this video, they both say, you know what, these are very surface level arguments. They're not the best atheist arguments. They're nothing to be convinced about. They're nothing too substantial in the support of atheism. But I found this to be super ironic because watching the video, Cameron and Dr. Criag respond to these clips very poorly a lot of the time. For example, Dr. Criag often strawmans arguments. He often takes arguments to the extreme. For example, he compares homosexuality to pedophilia, and he compares God caring what you do naked to sex trafficking, and they really just misconstrue a lot of arguments. And while these may not be the best atheist arguments, while these are seemingly very simple, it's these type of arguments that are actually very convincing for atheism, right? Dr. Criag does a lot of videos where he talks about things like, does math point to God with Graham Offey? And they sit there and they argue about aesthetics and mathematics for the first hour of the debate. And when people are deciding whether or not to be religious, they don't think about these super deep concepts. So I don't think that they're taking these best atheist arguments as seriously as they should, because these very simple arguments are what a lot of people see as contradictions in the Bible or things that just make religion not make any sense. So there are 14 clips that Dr. Criag and Cameron talk about, and I'm going to go through clip by clip, depending on how long the clip is, depending on how long the response and my response is. I might only have one clip per video, I might have two clips per video, and I'm not quite sure yet if I'm going to cover all the clips. Some of them aren't super exciting, but nonetheless, this is going to be a series covering many of these clips. The first clip that Cameron and Dr. Criag cover is a clip with Christopher Hitchens, and here you can check it out.
Clip queued up. We're gonna watch it, listen, and then we'll get your response, and we'll just keep on moving. Like I said, we have 14 clips to go through in total. So here is number one.
What is more likely? That the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake. And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did.
All right, so that's clip number one.
What Hitchens is expressing here is the old problem of the identification of a miracle. And I think his question was correctly posed. Which do you think is more probable? Now, in assessing that probability, it's important to take into account whether you have good evidence for the existence of God. Because if you have good evidence that there is a personal creator and designer of the universe who set the laws of nature and their boundary conditions, then there exists a being who is capable of suspending the laws of nature in the way that Hitchens describes. And it could well be that in the case of a significant religious and historical context, such as the unparalleled life and ministry and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, that the balance of probability would be that in this case a divine miracle has occurred. And that's exactly what I would argue.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add there other than to say that this kind of seems like some Humean reasoning, like David Hume's old argument against miracles. It's like no amount of testimony is going to overcome this kind of initial improbability that miracles face. And you've interacted with a lot of people on this question. Give me like what's your response to that, to like the Humean argument against miracles?
The Humean argument was formulated back in 1783 before the modern probability calculus was understood. And so Hume's argument against the probability of miracles is demonstrably mathematically fallacious because he neglects certain key elements in the probability calculus. All he considers is, what is the probability of the miracle given the general background information, the laws of nature? But what he fails to consider is the likelihood of the evidence occurring on the hypothesis of a miracle compared to the likelihood of the evidence occurring on the hypothesis the miracle did not occur. And if that ratio is great, it can easily outbalance any improbability of the miracle on the background information alone. Now, what I just said a moment ago would also suggest that the probability of the miracle on the background information alone can't be shown to be highly improbable if there is a God who is capable of intervening in the universe and suspending its laws. And so I think we need to include in the background information not just the laws of nature, but also the existence of God as established by the cosmological, teleological, moral, and so forth arguments.
Now, I want to say that I'm going to have a link to the full debate below and probably a few extra links of different videos and people that I talk about within this video. So as you can see from this clip, Christopher Hitchens essentially is saying, well, what's more likely, that you saw a miracle or that you were wrong, right? What's more likely, that the laws of nature suspended themselves, or that you heard somebody say that the laws of nature suspended themselves? Seems more likely that you were wrong than the laws of nature suspending themselves. And Dr. Craig's response to Hitchens is essentially that his logic and philosophy is flawed because he is not taking into account how probable it is that a God exists. And in Dr. Craig's mind, a God does exist, and the probability of God existing is very high. Therefore, he sees the probability of miracles to be very high. And so I want to cover the three arguments that Dr. Craig mentions. He doesn't explain them, but I want to demonstrate how they do not show that it is probable that a God exists. The three arguments that Dr. Craig mentions in this clip is, he mentions the moral argument, he mentions the teleological argument, which is the argument from design, intelligent design, and then he lists the Kalam cosmological argument, which Dr. Craig wrote his thesis on. Now, all three of these arguments, you can find many videos scattered around the internet critiquing them or showing their flaws, and I want to talk about them today to give a brief overview of the flaws that these arguments have and show that they do not prove a God to be likely. The first argument that I want to talk about is the Kalam cosmological argument. This is an argument that says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, a very common rebuttal of this argument is something that Apologia made a video about, where he talks about even if there is a cause to the universe, there is no reason to assume that that cause is a God, is a all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving personal being. There are an infinite number of possibilities. It could theoretically be a group of fairies. It could be that we're living in a simulation. And just, again, an infinite number of possibilities. It could be other gods like Allah, it could be the Hindu gods, it could be etc., right? There's no reason to narrow it down to one specific god within one specific religion, or even a god at all. Another critique is that we're not even 100% sure if the universe had a beginning. It could be the case that the universe was infinite, is timeless. It might be that the singularity that was there at the beginning of the Big Bang had always been there. And it could be the case that this singularity just goes through cycles, right? It explodes and expands for however many years and then goes back to a singularity in an infinite cycle. We don't know. And that's the best that we can say, is we do not know. We don't get to just throw in our assumptions of, hey, a God probably did it. No, we just get to say, we don't know. Another very interesting critique of the Kalam that I very much enjoy is that by Cosmic Skeptic, aka Alex O'Connor, where he talks about that the beginning to exist in premise 1 is actually different than the beginning to exist in premise 2. And the difference is that the things that we observe in the universe that come into existence come into existence from pre-existing matter, because the amount of energy and matter in the universe is constant, right? Matter and energy can turn back and forth between matter and energy, but that number will always stay the same. And so when we say something like you were created or you began to exist, you're beginning to exist through pre-existing matter. The atoms that make up your body have been there since the beginning of the universe. And so premise 2, when it says the universe began to exist, this is saying that the universe began to exist from nothing, and not some hypothetical nothing that people tend to call something. It just came from nothing. And we have never observed something coming from nothing, so we don't even know if that's possible. And now I want to look at the teleological argument, which is the argument from design, which is essentially that the universe is finely tuned. And there are several different versions of this argument. A very common argument is if you were to go out onto the beach and you were to find a cell phone, you would say that that cell phone is designed because it's complex, right? Like there's no way that it could have just been made by nature. And so people, they look at human beings and they say, well, look how finely tuned human beings are, look how complex they are, they must be designed. Now, there's obviously serious flaws with this argument, and it is that we know that cell phones cannot be made in nature. They're not a naturally occurring phenomena, but life is a naturally occurring phenomena, and things like DNA and RNA, we know how evolution works and takes place over billions of years, and we know that life came about naturally, and therefore there is no need to have an intelligent designer. Dr. Criag talks about the aspect of intelligent design with mathematical precision. He says that the universe has these mathematical constants that are incredibly precise, and if they were off by just a little bit, then life could not occur. An example that he uses is gravity. If gravity was off by just a little bit, our universe would be totally different and life could not be as it is today. And he takes that and he says, well, look at the probability of all these different universes existing. The probability that our universe exists is so tiny that there must be a God, a designer that designed this universe. But the major flaw with this is that the probability of our universe existing is 1, because our universe does exist. And we don't know if any other universes could exist. We don't know if the universe began to exist. And, it's kind of the same arguments that I was making before. Because our universe does exist, we have no evidence, empirical evidence, that a God designed it. We have no evidence. Even if we did have evidence that a God designed it, we have no idea what God that is. And through Dr. Criag's own logic, the probability that it is his God that intelligently designed the universe is so small that we shouldn't believe that that God exists. And so these are the reasons why these two arguments are flawed. And so now I want to talk about the last one, which is the moral argument, which is a very common Christian argument that says God has written a moral code on your heart, and that is why you're civilized. That's why you have things like empathy. That's why you show love to people. That's why you do all of these quote-unquote good things, right? Because God has written the law in your heart. That's why when you do something bad, you feel as though it's wrong, because God's moral law is on your heart. And because God's moral law is on your heart, therefore God exists, right? It's a circular argument, but it is a very common theist argument. And Apologia has a very good video on this as well, where he challenges Christians, or any religious people really, to provide a moral code that's written on our hearts that does not involve human well-being, because that is typically what secular morality is. It's focused around human well-being. This is a take of something like Sam Harris, where he says that which is good and that which is moral is that which is good for people's well-being, and that which is immoral or bad is that which is bad for people's well-being. And on top of that, humans show empathy and they show love, and these positive, good emotions that Christian things are instilled in our heart are actually explained through evolution and the will to survive and the will to build a species and have family, right? We realized as rational creatures, as creatures that can work together, we realized, hey, if we get a group of people together and we work together and we show each other empathy and we have love for one another and we cooperate and we set these laws, then life is better for all of us. And it's inherently selfish, right? If I help you, you help me, we both get things that are good out of it, and we get more than we would if I was just working by myself. This is kind of a secular morality, right? So the point that Apologia makes is that, hey, we should go with the simpler answer here, right? We know that evolution is true, and we know that this moral code was brought about by evolution, right? The will to survive, the will to have community, to show empathy to one another, to love, forgive, mercy. All of these concepts can be explained by societal reasons to survive, to flourish, to have better well-being. And so these are the ways in which just the three arguments that Dr. Criag gives are bad, are flawed. And the reason that I'm pointing all of that out is because he's using these arguments to say, hey, a God is probable. And in my opinion, none of those arguments lend to the probability of a God existing. There's no reason to think that a God exists through these arguments. And therefore, the conclusion is that Mr. Hitchens is correct, that it's more likely that you or the person that you heard about see a miracle. You're probably wrong, because the probability of a God existing that suspends the laws of nature is low or non-existent. And that covers clip 1 of this video. I'm going to continue to cover these clips because, as I said at the beginning of the video, I think there's a lot of flaws, and I think that Dr. Criag doesn't take these videos seriously. They don't really attack the fundamental issues within the arguments, and so I'm really looking forward to responding to this and also hearing your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video or have some thoughts, share it in a comment down below. Leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It would help me out so much, and I will see you in part 2. Bye bye.